do want to give though, if you've worked with AI too much or any of these tools, there is a baked in unpredictability factor, especially since tools like Cursor update a lot. And in fact, they just recently updated. We have noticed a little bit of deviation to the behavior of what we had planned out to show you today in some of the recent updates. We are going to go ahead and run through this live as we anticipated. In case we're seeing any wrinkles that we just didn't expect from our prep yesterday in the updates that just came through, we will fall back to a video showing the same thing. But I don't want you to worry. That means any of this is not wired up live. It just means for how we particularly set up our demo, some of the updates may have modified the performance a little bit. All right, and I'll go ahead and give it to Dan.
Great. Thanks, Ethan. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Yeah, as Ethan was mentioning, AI is unpredictable at times. So we're going to give it our best shot here. Know that the capabilities we show you with our MCP server built into the WireMock CLI behave as they should, even when the AI is not behaving the way it did last time or the way that we'd expect it to. And I think all of you that have used AI are used to this by now. So sometimes we have to ask it to recode something or make some modifications, even though we didn't have to ask for it the last time we tried it. So let's give it a shot here and we'll see how we make out. So let's get my screen shared here and we're going to start our journey today in the documentation. So I'm going to do a little Windows gymnastics here, moving some things out of the way. There we go. So first and foremost, you'll find the information about what we're talking about, how to get going, how to set up your environment inside of our docs, so docs.wiremock.io, and you can find the AI section on the left-hand side. So first and foremost, you'll see how we would go about installing the WireMock AI. Now that prerequisite comes with installing the WireMock CLI, which we've talked about already. So just as a quick refresher, that's an npm install. We do that globally. So the WireMock distributable command line is available no matter where you are inside of your computer, right? It's not being deployed into a specific directory with the global flag. Once we have that deployed, we should be able to issue our WireMock login command, which will then kick us over into WireMock Cloud in our browser, asking us to log in if we're not logged in already. It'll then prompt us with a code to verify inside of our command line to make sure that those codes line up before we accept that pairing, and then we're logged in. Now, once we're logged into the WireMock CLI, we would then go about configuring our AI coding tool. I'm going to be using Cursor today, but as you can see, we have some call outs for Cursor, Claude Desktop, and VS Code and GitHub Copilot. These are just a few that we've documented. Any coding assistant that supports the MCP protocol will be able to use the capabilities that we're showing you here today. Now, as Ethan mentioned, things change fast in this world of coding agents. So in our Cursor documentation here, we'll see an older experience of actually setting up the MCP server inside of Cursor. I'll actually show you what that looks like live inside of Cursor right now instead. So coming inside of Cursor, I go into my settings and I come into my Cursor settings, which brings me into this screen here. And then I can come down into the MCP section. Now, right now, I already have WireMock configured. We can see what I supplied in order to configure at. So this is that small deviation based on a Cursor update where our documentation was saying that this was GUI-driven configuration. They've actually recently switched this to a JSON file configuration set. And it's really simple to configure this. We're simply supplying a little bit of JSON here, telling it what is the WireMock MCP server, how do we instantiate it. That is just a call to the WireMock CLI with an argument of MCP. And that's really the only information that we need to supply to Cursor, our coding IDE here, in order to make this work. Once we've supplied that and we click save, we'll see that we now have this MCP server of WireMock enabled, and we can see the tools that our WireMock Cloud MCP server is exposing. Now, just a little bit of information about what this is. WireMock Cloud and our team are not building native AI into the platform. So you don't have to worry about any potential security or clearing a new AI capability through your security features. We are simply exposing via an MCP server commands that the AI agent that you've chosen inside of your organizations and that has been approved already can make calls to the WireMock Cloud platform to interact. So we can see we've got things like the who am I, we've got things for searching mock APIs, importing, resetting the request log, interrogating the request log, creating stateful sets for stateful mocking, just to name a few there. So these are just a command set that are exposing features and functionalities to the AI agent of your choice so that it knows how to interact with the WireMock Cloud platform in the, what's the word I want to say, meaningful way. That's not even the right word I wanted to use, but we'll just go for it right now. So now that we've got this configured inside of Cursor, our IDE, we can switch over to our demo application. So we're going to be using a little weather app demo application. I'll show it to you right now real quick what we're looking at. So it's right now running on my local environment on port 3000. When I refresh it, it's pulling up, looking at my IP address, determining where I am, and then feeding that into a publicly available weather API to go ahead and pull back the current weather conditions that we have at that locality. If we come over to WireMock Cloud right now and we hit refresh, we'll see that we have some stubs here, but nothing that is actually driving this application. So the first use case I want to cover with you today is we have a code base right now, and it's relying on live APIs. And those live APIs might be, in traditional sense, flaky, not always available, don't have the right data scenarios we need, can't handle the loaded performance testing, traffic that we want to throw out, any number of those hosts of challenges that we have with APIs that our application depends on. So what I can do now as a developer is decide that I want to virtualize all of the API dependencies found inside of my current code base here. So I'm going to copy a prompt from my other screen here, and we're going to go ahead and put it into our AI chat window here. So we're going to create a mock API. We're going to make sure that happens in WireMock Cloud for each of the APIs that are used by this current project. And we're also going to configure the application to use them when we deploy it in development mode. And then we're explicitly going to make sure that our AI agent doesn't use any local WireMock configurations and really relies on WireMock Cloud instead. So I'm going to go ahead and issue this here, and hopefully it won't take too long. Sometimes this can take 10 seconds. Sometimes this can take upwards of a minute. But while it's working, I want to point out one other thing that I missed in the settings. So if we come back into the Cursor settings and we come into the rules section, we'll see that I've supplied a few additional rules to Cursor when running some AI commands. And these are applicable to WireMock Cloud, right? So you can see that we're telling it that we prefer WireMock's multiple stub JSON format, that we don't need to add request header matchers. We want to make sure that the AI gets a meaningful name to each one of the stubs, so on and so forth. We'll publish some of these recommendations that you can include in your user rules, either via this method here in the users rules section. There's also another way of doing this specifically in Cursor, where we can have a Cursor rules file as well. So I have some Cursor rules files or rules in here that are defining just how I want to build my application. And then I also have a specific WireMock section here and also a Next.js section here as well. So we have our stuff created over here. We can see the changes that were recommended. We can go ahead now and verify that something was created inside of WireMock Cloud. So I'll hit refresh. We can see that we have two APIs that were recently created, the IP-API and the weather-API. We come into the weather API, pull up that request log, and let's go ahead and redeploy our application here. So I'll quit it from running, and we'll do an npm run dev again. And now we'll come back over to our application. And let's go ahead and give this a refresh. And now we can see that I'm getting San Francisco. Now, before we were pulling live data, I was sitting in Leesburg, Virginia. That's where I'm still sitting. But now it's pulling back San Francisco. And if we come back over to WireMock Cloud and we refresh our mock API request log, we can see that, yes, indeed, we are now getting requests and responses interacting with WireMock Cloud. So my AI agent has successfully used the MCP server to know how to create a mock API. It interrogated my code and the real APIs that it was calling, discovered how to build the stubs to support the mocking or virtualization of these two API endpoints, and did that all automatically for me in just a matter of seconds. All right, so let's move on to another use case here. The first thing I'm going to do is actually back out my changes. So let me go ahead and unwind a little bit of my changes here, discard some of my changes, make sure everything is cleaned up here. And we should be back to our base code. And I'll go ahead and relaunch it. And we should be back to our live non-virtualized experience. There we go. We're back to that live experience. So the next use case I want to walk you through is prototyping some new functionality inside of our application code. Oftentimes, new functionality requires new APIs, either internal or external, and we might just want to rapidly prototype that functionality in the consumer before we ask a producing team to go ahead and start building something. We can use AI to help do that as well. And with the help of the MCP integration to WireMock Cloud, we can make this happen very quickly and easily and painlessly. So let's come back into our coding agent here. We're going to spin up a new conversation, and I'm going to pull another prompt here. So let me copy this from my other screen, and we'll review it together. So in this case, we're going to expand our portal that we're building from just having a weather module to also having a to-do list built into it. Now, the to-do list, as we see in the prompt here, is going to take care of adding to-do items, be able to check them off, to delete them. Now, obviously, this is going to require some state. So we're going to explicitly tell our AI coding agent that we want to generate a stateful stub set when this mock API is built. And we can even give it some guidance about UUIDs for the tasks that are going to be created. So we're going to hit the button here again, and we're going to let it work its magic. And I will pause for a second while this is going and ask Ethan if we have any questions queued up while we're watching the AI think here.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks, Dan. We do have a few questions. One I'm happy to take, which is what different coding tools does this work with to begin with? So MCP itself is a technology that Anthropic released. It's being adopted pretty rapidly across the AI ecosystem. If you think of any I miss here, Dan, let me know. But for instance, Cursor works, Windsurf works. There are plugins to use it in JetBrains. Some of the other emerging ones like Klein work just fine. VS Code has plugins for it. I think Sourcegraph's Cody is either working on it or just released a version on it. I'm not completely up to date on that. I think for most of the major editors, though, it either is officially supported or there is some level of unofficial support at this point.
Excellent. So let's just take a look at what's going on. We're still generating here a little bit, but we can see in our chat log here where the MCP tool is being called, and we can actually see what's working here. So we can see that a create mock API operation, the AI coding agent used that as part of the MCP server, and it passed a name of the to-dos API. And we can see the result of that the mock API was successfully created, and we actually have an ID here. And we can come down and see that we also got the generate stateful stub set. So it took our command, our ask to create a stateful mock API, and we can see what it's done there. And then coming down a little bit further, we can see that it did the get stub mappings to find out what does this thing do. Now, as you would expect with AI, things aren't behaving as we would want. We can see that our AI agent is still stuck in generating right here, trying to, at this point, now that it has the resources inside of WireMock Cloud, which we can verify, here's the To-Do API, working on building the application changes to make use of this mock API. So let's take a walk at what it created, or walk through what it created. So we have the To-Dos API. We can see that it's used the stateful set to create our gets, our posts, our put, our delete endpoints, even our 404 endpoint. In creating an API, in the create API for the post, we can see it's making use again of that stateful set where it's going to generate those IDs. It took our guidance and made sure to use a random value of UUID for generating those random values. And then it is taking what we are posting in the body, or what our consumer posts in the body, and adding that into the collection here. So we can see that piece, all the pieces inside of WireMock Cloud have been completed successfully. We have a mock API for this new service that will need to support this front-end consumer modification or enhancement. We can even come into the Open API section and see that we have our Open API specification file defined for us. And even coming into settings and enable the public documentation, we can see we have developer documentation. So once we have rapidly prototyped this and gotten a feel for how we want this to work inside of our consumer code, we can simply pass over the Open API specification document as well as this developer documentation to the producing team, who now needs to go and implement this new to-do list API so that our consumer can consume it in the way that we're expecting. Let's check on our coding agent here. It doesn't look like it continued. So let's ask for it one more time, see if it gets over the hump here. Hopefully it will behave as we're expecting. It looks like we're stuck on generating at this point. Let's see. Oh, okay, there we go. It's moving along again. Just taking a little bit longer. Ethan, you got another question for me while we let this go again?
Yeah, we got a great question. It's not specifically about MCP, but I actually think dovetails nicely into MCP. Somebody asked if we have any vertical service virtualization solutions like banking specifically. And I think there's a couple good answers to that question. One is we have a feature called templates library, which we won't go too much in detail now, but does have thousands of templates for different APIs that exist that you can use out of the box, and you can build your own templates. The other answer, actually, in what Dan's showing you, is you can imagine how easy it would be to do what Dan's doing against any collection of public specs or public APIs that you could record to very quickly virtualize anything in your specific vertical or industry that you want. So while we don't have a tailor-made vertical solution, we do have a robust templates library. And with what Dan's showing, I think pretty much any industry you're in, you can see here how in 10 minutes of prompting, you could probably have most of those APIs fully virtualized.
Great. I do see that we have a question in the Q&A panel. I'll read it out loud. So what if we don't want any developer to add new mocks and want that to be controlled through a review before we deploy to WireMock? How can we allow our developers to use the AI, but have the new APIs be reviewed by a team? So this is a great question. A couple things come to mind, which might not be a straightforward answer to it, but keep in mind that when we use the MCP server on the developer workstation like we're using here, and we issue that WireMock login command, that is authenticating us into the WireMock Cloud platform as our configured user. So we have to be an existing user in the WireMock Cloud account. And then all of the role-based access control that is currently assigned to that user still applies inside, even when using MCP. So if we ask the MCP to modify a mock API that we only have read access to, that will 100% fail, right? Because all of those role-based access controls for the user who's currently logged in via the WireMock CLI still apply. When the MCP creates a new mock API, remember, as a normal WireMock Cloud user, a non-admin, When a mock API is created, it is only viewable by the creator and by the admins themselves. So just creating a mock API doesn't necessarily make it available to all users inside of WireMock Cloud. So that could help to address some of those challenges that you were mentioning there. You could, at that point, as an admin, look at the mock APIs that were created by the MCP integration, and then decide to share those more widely with a wider team as an approach for that. We could also make use of some of those cursor rules that I talked about a little bit earlier, where all mock APIs might be preferred. Any new mock API created in WireMock Cloud by the MCP server should be prefaced with draft or with whatever you might want to denote that it has not been approved for wider consumption just yet. These are just a few things coming off the top of my head right now. Great question. Really something for us to think about as we consider finer grained access controls in the future of the platform.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I just put our emails there in the chat. If you'd like to chat a little bit more about that question, I would love to discuss it with you. If you want to just drop me a line, I think everything Dan shared there is, I think, a great current solution to the problem, but I'm definitely kind of curious the direction of the overall controls you're looking for. So please do get in touch and we can talk about it further.
All right, so we kicked the tires once, and then we kicked the tires a second time. That got us over the hump. Let's just go verify inside of WireMock Cloud that our to-dos is still there. We can see that because we restarted the agent, or we send the same prompt again, it created a second one for us. No harm, no foul. It's still of our open API style type. We can see that this is an 8VD39. Let's come back over. We can see that the AI agent has successfully modified our environment file to point at that 8VD39. Let's go ahead and restart our application at this point. So npm run dev after killing the server. We can see it's up and running. We come back over into our dashboard here. We can already see that we already have our to-do list down here. And we can see we have this request failed with status 404. We'll have to look into what that is. This is, again, just one of those abnormalities with AI. It tends to do things a little bit differently each time. Let's try adding a task here. So add a task. And we can see, yep, not really behaving the way that we'd expect it to behave. So we can come into our WireMock Cloud Mock API. We can see, what it's created here. Furthermore, come into our request log, and we can come down here and see, okay, add a task, it's coming back, and it's giving us this error. Now, I want to try something live with you, something I hadn't planned to do with you today, but let's go ahead and actually ask the MCP server to troubleshoot this for us. We can say that I'm receiving a 404 in the to-do list widget. Use the WireMock Cloud request log and our code to figure out and fix the issue. And let's see if our AI coding agent, using this directive and one of the other MCP commands we have, we can see it successfully interpreted my request to interrogate the request journal of the mock API, to look at the traffic, the requests that are coming in, and the responses coming out, and then cross-reference that against the implementation that it put to see if it can figure out exactly what the issue is. So we can see the root cause of the 404 is that the app was sending a request to the root of the WireMock Cloud base URL instead of the API to-dos. So let's go ahead and see if this has fixed our issue. npm run dev. Come back into our weather dashboard. There's no to-dos. Our 404 has now been fixed. Test this. Complete this. Delete this. So we can complete this. Let's go ahead and refresh. Let's delete this. Let's go ahead and refresh. And we can see we're getting accurate behavior at this point of what we'd expect. So while the first iteration, the first attempt by the AI agent had a little snafu in the way that it created the mock API, we asked it to use the request log journal and look at the code and make sure that it implemented it correctly the first time, in which it determined it didn't and fixed it for us. Just one command there. Really cool functionality, very helpful here. If we refresh, we can now see that we're getting successful matches. We're no longer getting the failed unmatched requests. We're seeing our deletes. If we come into our post, those of you familiar with stateful mocking can see our dynamic state events being documented down below. So another very powerful feature here. One more use case I want to show you with the time we have today. I know we're going a little bit longer than typical here, but we're interweaving questions and working through the challenges that you all experience in working with AI coding agents, I'm sure, day to day. Let's take a look at one more capability and being able to prototype GraphQL endpoints. As many of you are aware, we've introduced GraphQL as a first-class citizen style of mock API in WireMock Cloud. Let's go ahead and ask our coding agent to actually build a prototype GraphQL endpoint for us. So we're going to spin up a new chat here, and I'm going to grab my prompt and we'll put that in here. Generate a simple GraphQL schema for travel booking with bookings, flights, airlines represented, save the file locally, and create a GraphQL mock API and upload the schema. So this should just take a moment or two. This one is typically rather quick. We'll see that we've got the create mock API, we're putting the GraphQL, and we've got the schema created. Now, where's that schema? It's saved inside of /schema and travel booking. Let's hop over into Postman and import that. So we're going to select files here. Let's come back to our weather app. And it told us that it was in the schema folder. Here's our travel booking. We can import this. Let's go ahead and import this as the GraphQL. And if we pop this open, we look at the queries. Let's go ahead and post a query to bookings. Now, first, we have to go and grab our mock API endpoint. So here's our travel booking that was freshly created. I'll grab the mockql endpoint or mock API, mockql, that's a new word, mock API endpoint. And let's go ahead and send a request there. So we can see we are getting data back from our mock API endpoint. Now that data looks pretty nonsensical at this point because based on the schema information, it didn't really supply very much detail as to what does good data look like. Let's come into our travel booking and see what we've got. Just like creating a GraphQL mock API by uploading the schema, we get that generic default mock data stub that comes down in here. We can, of course, come down and change our data generation if we want to be more specific, but we've got a better way to handle that with our coding agent. So let's go to our request log and we'll take a look at this one that was sent and we'll convert this to a stub and we'll save it. So we've got this query and we're locking in how we want this query to be handled. Now, right now, it's got some nonsensical data. Let's actually ask our agent to make some better data for us. So I'm going to put one more prompt in here. So for the mock API you just created, improve the stubs for listing bookings, making the response data more realistic. Don't modify any other part of the stubs. So we'll ask this. We can see that it's going to go ahead and get the stub mappings for the mock API it just created. It's going to update those stub mappings. And we can see that it has said that it's made some changes. Let's come back over to Postman and execute our query one more time. And now we can see that our from me data has now been fixed with more lifelike data, where we have passenger names that look real, seat numbers that are sensical, and statuses that conform to airline bookings as we'd expect here. And coming back into WireMock Cloud, if we just simply refresh here, we can see the changes that it's made into the mock API. So 3 use cases we've covered today, from taking your existing code base and modifying it so that it detects the API dependencies that are in it and builds mock APIs for them, A second use case where we prototyped new functionality, including doing some mock first API prototyping, where the consuming application behavior was built out and then the backing API was prototyped so that we can now hand off those assets to the producing team who needs to build that API. They have an open API specification document. They have developer portal documentation as well to refer to so that it can deliver on that contract that we're expecting from the consumer. And then the third example that we showed today was using our MCP capability to prototype a GraphQL style of mock API and even asking it to improve the data that it uses when responding back using that mock API as well. With that, I'll stop my screen share here and ask Ethan if we have any time for additional questions.
Yeah, I think we do have some additional questions. One broad question, just wondering, like, what have you seen primary challenges in getting started with this? Like you saw the one where you had to rerun it, for instance. Is that pretty common? Are there any kind of gotchas people should generally be looking for as they get started?
I would say don't expect the same behavior 2 times in a row. For those of you working with AI coding agents, code assistants, or even Jive-based coding, I think you'll recognize that this is just a common outcome of using these agents where you can ask for the same thing 2 days in a row and get a different experience, a different response from it. So as you see those things come up, making use of those rules files, like the cursor rules file, to give the AI more guidance. Hey, don't do this. I prefer you do it this way. As you saw in one of the prompts, there was the prefer UUIDs for the ID fields when we created a stateful mock. That was just some guidance in doing this a few times that, hey, we'd rather use UUIDs than random strings or random integers or whatnot. It's just much like in development, it's an iterative process, and you build up your cursor rules files. And for something like Cursor, there's great documentation out there on how you can develop a program around cursor rules files that are cascading, organization-wide cursor rules files. And those have to be used in all projects. And then you can inherit individual developer cursor rules files that will then tack onto the inherited ones. So there's great capabilities in these coding tools and platforms. I would just say, to loop back to the question and reiterate again, as you learn that the AI tends to do 2 different things, pick the way that you like, that you preferred, add it to your cursor rules going forward so that you can prevent those deviations in the future. But as far as what we saw today, it was a great example of, okay, it's not always going to get it right the first time. It might not get the implementation of the new widget on the UI right, or it might not get the data scenario right in creating the mock API paths. But a quick command to interrogate the request log and our code, you saw how quickly that was fixed to address that challenge.
Great. And I will reiterate one more time that we're showing all this on Cursor, right? But you can use any of the MCP assisted tools on the market to do this. The MCP integration we've got is not Cursor specific. It is just baked into the WireMock CLI itself. So you get the WireMock CLI, and then anywhere that an MCP bridge is supported, you can use the WireMock CLI natively with it. With that, I will wrap up with asking you to get in touch if you're trying this out and have feedback. Obviously, this is new for all of us. It's new for the whole industry. We've seen a lot of very promising results, both with human coding with this, as well as with agentic workflows with this, because we find that with the mocks, the agents can iterate much faster and you don't have to worry about API access issues. But we're still learning. I'm sure you're still learning. So this is one we would love to hear from you. If you have ideas, opinions, interesting findings, go ahead and get in touch. And with that, we'll let you go. So thank you so much for joining us in the middle or beginning or end of your day. And we will be in touch in about a month, and we'll do another one of these with a topic we haven't decided yet, but should be just as interesting. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks all.